since there are quite a number of new people here who've never, as far as I recollect, have been to a talk before, let me say that this talk is not given by someone who sees herself as a teacher, as somebody who knows more than others, as someone who is an authority, as someone apart, separate from whoever is listening. So talking this morning is also listening and looking together, inquiring jointly, questioning, not taking the words that are spoken for something that's true or authoritative, to be remembered, stashed away in the brain for future helpful reference. But something that can be shared immediately together. In these talks, the question is, can the listening and the talking be one mutual process? Of inquiry into not just one's personal life, but human life, the way we human beings live alone and together. Looking at one's own personal life, but not getting stuck there as this being very unique, very different from the way all of us live and think and act, alone and together. But maybe widening the scope, from the personal to what is universally true for human beings. Since the last talk in Rochester, which was less than a week ago, all kinds of questions have come up in meetings with people or just conversation. I do write some of these questions down so that we can use a talk for sharing these questions and the inquiry. Actually, what is not written down yet, the most recent questions came up last night. We were, a few of us, several of us were sitting in the apartment watching a videotape in which a theoretical physicist by the name of David Bohm, who has for years dialogued with the late Krishnamurti, was now on this tape in conversation with two psychologists, a psychiatrist and a psychologist. The topic was the nature of the human mind, if I remember correctly, and specifically also to look at the ways of psychotherapy, the ways in which psychotherapy, psychiatry approaches the human mind with its endless problems, and whether there are any limitations to this approach. And the question that came up after the tape was, one of the questions, what happens to a human being? In this case, the questioner was concerned about a psychotherapist who has devoted his life and his income, his livelihood on helping people through psychotherapy. What happens in this particular case, but we were also looking at it generally, when a human being has insight into this whole complex of self, ego, the me, the I, and sees that the way one has lived up till now was within the context of that, taking it for granted, or as the psychologist and psychotherapist confirmed, working within the confines and trying to fix it, to adjust this self, to strengthen it. What if a person, having lived this way as all of us do, sees the fragmentariness of this approach, that to come to the understanding of truth, the totality of the self needs to be seen and questioned and seen. And then what does one do? Where does one stand in one's profession? Can one continue? Because it's a theoretical question, isn't it? Is one at that point? And then what flows out of this insight? Is that then theoretical or quite concrete? And this question was not so different from a lot of questions that came up during the week, which I made a note of. And I'll read them all because we can share these questions, which are not so typical for A, B, C, that this is what distinguishes A from B, that A has this question. Big A has the question of little a, big B has the question little b. But today it may be so, tomorrow big A may have little b as a question and big B may have little a as a question. Today we are so unique in this, tomorrow if circumstances change, all of a sudden we are confronted with new problems, which are all coming out of a pool of human problems because they come out of this human mind, created by the human mind in its fragmentation, dividedness. So one person said, I feel I want to be alone more. Where I live, I'm hemmed in, crowded in by lots of people, involved with work and a close living situation with many people. And I feel I don't have enough time to be alone. I have a real yearning to be quiet, alone, not always with people, trying to please them or trying to get pleasure from them. And of course the question, should I change my lifestyle to be able to incorporate this aloneness, the time for aloneness into my lifestyle? Another person said, I don't want to be alone. I'm so much alone. feeling separated, cut off from people, isolated in my own world. I feel lonely most of the time. Do I need my way of living to be more with people, to feel less isolated? And yet the fear of that, the desire for it, yet the fear of people. One person said, I realize that in order to understand the way I live, I need to enter into silence more often. I've done it in the past, but right now there's a real resistance to entering into silence, to being alone. Why do I have this resistance to really be silent with the problems, with my problems? Always seems to be something beckoning to be done, some escape. There's a real feeling that what I need to do is be silent, and yet with no particular schedule here. Or something to conform to have scheduled periods of silence. I find I'm not doing it, and yet I would like to. What is this resistance? Also, I want that silence, but I'm afraid of it. Why? That was the question. And another person saying, I have some feeling for what this awareness that you speak about so much, for what that is. Really aware of all that's going on in oneself, one's hang-ups, one's attachments, idiosyncrasies and desires. But I don't know whether I want that. I'm afraid of this kind of awareness. Afraid of maybe in the light of this awareness having to give up what I'm attached to. Afraid, so the person put it, of losing this self. Which of course one can see is at that instant a thought, isn't it? A theory. If there is a tension which reveals the self, I would have to give it up. Which is not attention. That's the self talking about itself, thinking about its future, which may be in danger, so it thinks. And another person said, can there be a stable, abiding awareness? I'm not asking for perfection, but is there such a thing as a somewhat stable, abiding awareness, not just a flickering, like we see the fireflies out at night, and a flickering of light and then darkness again? Of course, with a lot of flickering, there's quite a bit of light there at night with the fireflies. And yet, for this one little firefly, it's an instant. And it's an instant at a certain phase of its life cycle. And then we don't see them anymore for the rest of the year. The flickering has stopped, and now is the involvement with the mating, I guess, has been over. That's the attraction for mating, and now it's the eggs and the care and the wintering without any light. So is this what this awareness that you talk about is sort of doomed to be a flickering maybe here and there, but nothing abiding? What is abiding is the involvement in oneself. Or, can you tell me whether there is more stability? Can be more stability in attention? So it would make this whole work worthwhile? Don't seem to see much value in it if it's just this flickering off and on, or maybe a little bit longer and more frequent flickers during a retreat. And then darkness again, the darkness of involvement in me, my problems, my future, my past. And another person asks, why do we forget these moments of awareness? It seems that they are entirely forgotten. Moments of awareness meaning a moment when there's really no division between being aware and what it is that one is aware of. No thought, interpreting or reacting, wanting or escaping, just what is. And even though there are glimpses of this is there for a flickering moment or maybe longer. Why do we forget that? And become again so involved in our daily routines, our daily excitements, pleasures, wants, and with not a memory there of that, which seems so much deeper, so much more essential. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? The things that we brood over or think about wanting or fear that may happen again, we go over them and over them and over them. These things become these experiences, past experiences, memories, or desires for the future. They become deeply ingrained in the memory just from constant usage, from repetitiveness. The more one thinks about something, something happens in the brain cells, and the connections there, they're thickened. I once learned many years ago in psychology some change in the synapses connecting input and whatever. The more we think about it, the more we remember it. The more we're afraid of something, the more we're likely to remember it. The more we desire something, the more frequently we think of this desirable event or person, the more likely we're to think about it again. And this thing of awareness doesn't seem to leave any memory trace. Because in itself, it isn't thinking. It hasn't anything to do with knowledge or memory. It is the freedom from that, the insight, the awareness that is not colored, shaped, or determined by anything that's known, or to be known. It can't be known. That knowing it, verbalizing about it, that's a thought, and we remember that. We may remember that thought. But that's not the real thing. And sometimes people ask us, very frequent, a question, how can I remember that more often? So I will come to my senses. Not just be dragged or pushed or pulled, compelled, habitually, mechanically, the way it happens without this awareness. And usually the way the brain goes about wanting something says, how can I remember that? And here's something that eludes remembrance. Or if it is a memory, it's not the real thing. I think we talked last Monday about someone who is setting an alarm for a certain interval to just remember. There's nothing wrong about it. It's nothing right about it. What is important is there, at that instance, the freedom from memory, the awareness of the ticking of the beeping of the thing, and what is going on outside, inside. Or is the first thought at the beep, now I must be attentive, which is not attention, it's a thought. I must be attentive, or oh my God, here 40 minutes have gone by again and I wasn't attentive, which is another thought. Or, how can I be attentive right now, is a thought. Is that a thought? The instantness of listening without knowing, the immediacy of it. Thought rushes in very quickly, does it? Can that be seen without wanting it to be otherwise? Because then thought builds upon thought, judgment upon judgment, which is not awareness. Awareness doesn't know whether it's right or wrong. It's just listening. Or the breathing, the sensation of whatever is involved in this process we call breathing, palpitation of the heart, feeling in the back, the knees, the humidity, the cloth on the skin, a fan or some sound. One doesn't need to know what it is. It's just this unfocused, unmotivated, completely non-directional openness to what is actually there this instant. And that doesn't depend on the beep of an alarm. And the beep of an alarm may not bring it about. Actually, I don't know whether anybody can tell what brings it about. It comes on its own. When the mind begins to wonder whether there is anything beside thought, dreams, will, fear, all the mechanical, repetitive, compulsive, daily, nightly habits into which we are locked. Wondering whether this is all there is, or whether... No, not or whether, just wondering and listening. finding out. One person brought up a question somewhat similar to the first one from last night, saying I'm sort of at I feel very crucial time in my life. I may very soon be involved with making money or pursuing a college career or a money-making career, a business career, a family career. And I realize, I'm not in it yet, I realize this will be tremendous involvement, tremendous momentum to it. And I'm wondering, at this point where I'm not involved in this yet, should I enter into that? Because my feeling is once I have entered into it, I may be swallowed up by this. Wanting more. Oh, the whole momentum of this, what we call our worldly, daily, nightly life. Or is there an alternative? Is this work you're doing here, is that an alternative? A real alternative, not just more of the same in a different garb. And would I want to live simply, just with awareness? What would my future be? What would my security be in that? Because I see in contemplating these questions that the need for security seems to be so all-powerful, all-important. And what security is there in awareness, having a clear mind? Not pursuing career, the growth and development and aggrandizement of the self in job, academics, family, and its problems, of course. Where am I if there is no pursuit, just this attention from moment to moment? Can I have faith in that? Can I trust that to make me safe? Of course, one sees, one recognizes the problem of the me in there. The me is what wants and needs to be safe. The me has the dreams and the fears and the will to make those dreams come true. Climbing social, industrial, churchly or ladders, or creating a family. But not ever at peace or at rest. The me is never at rest or at peace with what it has, because restlessness and wanting more and fearing not getting or wanting something different and dissatisfied with what one has, that's the very nature of the me. It comes with it. Because the me is already a fictional separation from the totality of life. It's fiction that I am a separate individual entity, owning my talents, my body, my looks, my past, my future, being the owner and the master of it. That's a fiction. to which we're all so deeply, fundamentally attached. Whether or not it's a fiction, I'm not making an assertion to be swallowed or rejected, but to be investigated. What it is that makes up this feeling of me, the thoughts, the memories, the aspirations, the grades we have received since preschool, kindergarten. We were just talking about it here this morning. They're already getting grades and prizes in kindergarten, and the self-image for the one who receives the prize and the self-image for the one who does not. The way one is treated, well or rejected, all of this making up this feeling of me, these multiple images. The talents that happen to be inherited by all of us. They're not. Who is the owner of them? It can be a thought that this is mine, but that's a thought. One is born with a tremendous amount of inherited potential, inherited from parents, grandparents, and the further on one goes, from all of the potential talent of this human mind. A pool of it, pool of genes, we were told years ago in school. Today it's a pool of DNA. And our opinions that we have, our prejudices, our convictions, where did we get them from? Do we own them? Is there an owner, or is it just what has been fed into us? Since we were able to hear and listen and identify. Either identify with what our parents and teachers fed into us, or object to it, rebel against it, which is a reaction growing out of what has been fed into one. So where are we individuals? Is there someone who has all that, who is all that, or is there just what is? The abilities, the looks, the idiosyncrasies, the memories, specific in each case. None of us shares exactly the same memories because no one was exactly in the same situation. So different memories, different habits, slightly different, not so unusual from one person to the next, were built up in all of us. But that's, again, common to all of us, to have somewhat different memories, somewhat different upbringing, social class, culture, language, the country we grew up in, the city or in the country. And then some words, some thoughts inside say, this is me. I'm different from you. And the attachment to this difference, the attachment to me, to my past and to my future, to the accumulated story, novel of my life and its continued volumes for the future, attachment to those future volumes of the novel of my life. to grasp this inner complexity of me, which is the outer complexity of this society we live in, or the whole world we live in. One is the extension of the other. To grasp that, is there any interest, any concern? Right now, not sometime in the future. When I get some time, I'll look at all this. And if there is concern about this complexity, this conflicting complexity within oneself, conflicting wants, conflicting fears and desires and life situations inwardly, and our conflict with each other outwardly in the smallest nucleus of the family, in the broadest scale of international terrorism, war, misunderstanding, lack of communication. If this concern is there, what does it have to wait for? To unfold, to deepen, to bring to light, to bring to the surface, to see. What does it have to wait for? If the question begins to simmer or burn, well, what is this, me? How do I live from moment to moment? Whether or not it needs a special environment, one will see as one goes. Whether the environment in which one lives is threatening to that or makes it impossible, not to decide this theoretically, but to see. And if the need to understand, to probe, to question, to be quiet at times is there, one will change a situation. One will drop membership in clubs or whatever takes one's time. This just came up as a memory. I used to do some singing. I was a member of several clubs and organizations where there was opportunity for recitals, and I cherished those times. There was something to fill up one's life and give one something seemingly a little bit important to do. But so much goes with this. Social events, and it wasn't a renunciation. I wasn't giving up, or what was mentioned here earlier, this fear. If I do this work, I'll have to give up myself or give up what I'm attached to. It was none of that. It was very easy to walk away from what was no longer important. There's no sacrifice involved at all. The simplification of one's life proceeded very naturally and painlessly, not with any plan or intention. It comes out of this moment-to-moment questioning, which comes out of moment-to-moment concern and looking what goes on, what happens as one does and says and thinks things so totally inattentively, the insensitivity to others, to oneself, the mistakes we make, the hurts we inflict, the things we regret, out of just not being there, running on automatic. And realizing one doesn't want to live this way, and one also doesn't want to constantly have to regret and make up and then already enter the new phase of darkness in this regretting and making up. And not making a thing out of this work, what we call this work, because it isn't a thing. It's just simple attention and awareness, which needs no special label or ceremony or environment or teacher. It's openness, vulnerability, experimental mindedness, not taking for granted that one needs defense every instant. We do defend ourselves. But the moment one sees that, one can wonder whether it's necessary. And the seeing already makes it unnecessary. Because what is one defending other than an image? Me. How I look, how I want to be treated, talked to. It's just habitual. We've always done it, so what we've always done, we have a tremendous momentum to continue. But it doesn't have to continue. One doesn't have to defend. What a tremendous relief to find that. In the moment there's not attention, there's defense and attack, individually and on a global scale. So if one wants to be alone, what does one mean by that? Can one not hide or be taken in by the word one uses for one's desires? One may verbalize one's seeming desire to be alone, and that verbalization already has an effect. I want to be alone. That's a very laudable thing. I don't want to depend on others, whatever. Not to just be verbalizing something and then living in that verbal goal, but to look at what does it mean? What does one mean when one says one wants to be alone? What does it mean to be alone? As we were looking at it with whoever it was that was bringing this up, it became quite clear. I was still living. I was living with my desires more unimpeded, doing what I want to do, but not impeded by others. Not having to regard the needs of others. Alone with my dreams of what one would like to do most, which is not aloneness. Aloneness is no dreams, no impediment or influence through ideas or others, other people. Just because one lives alone, away from people or away from a city doesn't mean that the mind is alone, free from wants, fears, impediments, selfish needs. Selfish not said judgmentally, but coming out of the need of the self. And the resistance to looking, the resistance to awareness or to entering into silence, into quietness. Not just remain with the verbalization of it, but question it. What is resistance? We so quickly, when we have put something into a good statement, we can put it aside. We know something about ourselves, and after all, this is an asset. Now I have understood something more about myself, and I can shelve it. That's why it's so dangerous to stick with the verbalizations or diagnoses about oneself. It prevents further looking. What is resistance to being quiet? To inquiring in silence? What is the resistance? I don't know how one can find out unless one questions it without any ideas what it is, that it is bad, that it is justifiable, or something to be overcome, something to be knocked down. That's not finding out what this resistance is. What is it? As it manifests. And if this question comes alive, one really wants to touch this resistance, be intimate with it. There's a natural quietness setting in. One stops thrashing about or turning on the radio or TV if this is an important problem. Really beckoning to be investigated. And why not sit with it? Not in a certain posture. That's the least important thing. But quietly. And in sitting quietly and openly to investigate something, one may find where is the resistance? It was thought about what will happen in the quietness, or thought about what will happen if I don't have my habitual fixes. The ideas. The fear of what will happen to me if there is clarity and awareness in my job. Will this mean that I will give up my job? My relationship? How can this be settled unless one looks as one works? As one relates? Admittedly, our whole lifestyle, our whole societal offerings are for distraction, for entertainment, for inciting our desires, wants, needs, fears. But are we just doomed to be too exposed and sucked in and carried along? Because the momentum is so overwhelming. One may not hear the song of a bird in an office with 60 computer terminals. Can one hear the computer terminals pounding away with the fingers, the touch on the keyboard, the chatter of the talk, the buzz of the neon lights? See the people around one with fresh eyes and ears. Is that possible? Not for 8 hours a day, no program, no quantification, but just for a moment at a time. Just as listening to whatever's here for a moment at a time. No preconception, no intention, just because it's there. And if thought comes up, this is such and such a bird, or what is the name of that bird, or I should remember this bird song next time I'm in the office. Maybe that'll help me. Can one see the operation of thought? Listen to that as to the song of the bird itself. Notice it, be aware of it without judging it. And if a judgment has already taken place, what of it? It can be seen. It can be heard inwardly with an openness that wants nothing for itself. That is neither of the past nor of the future. It's not there, it's just listening. People say to me, when you speak of attention like that, it immediately seems to condense into a goal. This is what I must strive for. All right, so it happens. We have been trained, the brain has been conditioned this way, to make goals out of desirable experiences, or just desirable stories, may not be an experience. But that in itself can be witnessed as happening. The condensation into a goal. I must do this. This must be my work. And to see that at that moment the birds are nowhere there anymore. They may be faintly in the background, but what's in the foreground is the visualization of the goal and an incitement within the whole organism to get there. That's what we often call inspiration, an energy. To witness all of that, not as a separate witness. That word has its trickiness. Just awareness of that alongside with whatever else is happening. Is that possible? For a moment at a time? Without any guarantees or that it will or will not happen again, then the mind is condensing, shrinking. Do you see that? Somebody also during the past week said, I notice in doing this work of observing inwardly the thoughts, the feelings, the pressures, the knots that may come into awareness, I become very focused on myself. I see this as a real danger of this work, to become very focused and concerned with my problems, my condition, my suffering, my difficulties. It's important to see that, because that's a real trap. And that's not attention, it is focus. It's introspection or analyzing oneself. Maybe having some partial insights, but within a very narrow scenario, in a very small stage. And if one notices getting very concerned with oneself, sort of feeling in this cocoon of self-concern, can one watch whether there's direct awareness or whether one is mostly reflecting upon oneself, thinking about one's thoughts, thinking about the ego, thinking about one's pains and sufferings and problems, which gives this feeling of enclosure. An opening listening, which is not focused, and yet not denying whatever pain or emotions or thoughts may be there, but the openness, the non-focusedness, the non-exclusiveness is not reflection. It's just seeing what's there this moment. And not attaching to it as me. How I want to be or how I don't want to be. That's what happens. We attach to what we see. And then the seeing is over and the attachment continues to my bad images or my good images. Can attachment be seen as it happens? Not thought about or objected to or made vows against, but seen. The attachment to one's image. The fear for it or the hatred of it or the wallowing in it. It's all discernible. That's the beauty of this work. One can see it. And needn't condemn it. The seeing is sufficient. Condemning prevents seeing. It's not a matter of I shouldn't be attached, or it's human nature to be attached, but to see it without any reaction to it, one way or the other. Allowing the seeing to operate. It has its own intelligence. And compassion. We're really not different from each other, fundamentally. Can one see that? We will end here for today.